So
now can we start, sir?
Yes. So Mr. PV Singh will be giving a small introduction of ma'am. So I really wanted to convey that, with global warming, which is leading to intense heat waves, reducing sea levels and shrinking the ice sheets, and the entire world, and we can see now, for the last 5 days, 4 days in Delhi also, that we're all seeing a climate crisis. And energy transition with ESG is actually the need of the sustainable goal economy. And your topic is so appropriate for all our listeners, including all the members of Skill Council for Green Jobs, that we would like to know more about how ESG would help in the energy transition. And we would certainly like to hear from you. So thank you so much once again for coming and gracing us with your presence, Prarthana ji. So over to you. Over to Mr. PV, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for welcoming the speaker and other participants. Thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll welcome you all to the 85th series of the webinar. The Skill Council for Green Job is organizing a series of webinars to celebrate Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav as a part of India's celebration of 75 years of independence. In this series, SCGJ is inviting eminent and learned speakers in different sectors on sustainable development, renewable energy, and waste management, so as to deepen the understanding of recent development in these sectors. The first in the series was launched on 24th September 2021. Today we have Ms. Prarthana Borah, a very experienced, learned, distinguished speaker who will be sharing his expertise and experience on understanding in ESG in the role of disclosure in energy transition. I would like to share his brief profile with all of you. Ms. Prarthana Borah joined the CDP in December 2021 as an India director. She brings over 2 decades of the experience in the strategy planning, building networks, and program leadership on diverse sustainability issues like climate change, air pollution, and biodiversity conservation. She was previously the country director of India of Clean Air Asia and an international not-for-profit set up by the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and USAID, responsible for the expansion and position of the organization strategical in India. Before this, Ms. Prarthana worked in the National Institute of Indian Government Ministries, where she was involved in leading and implementing projects, capacity building, training, publication, fundraising initiatives, and partnerships with the private sector's stakeholders, civil society, and donors to influence policy and action. She holds a master's in economics and is trained in environmental education. Now I am requesting Ms. Prarthana Borah to start the presentation. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to talk about the work that I do to new audiences. And this is an opportunity to look at the areas that I work in, primarily climate, water, forest, the overall environmental sector from the perspective of where we are going in terms of Skill India, in terms of where the growth is expected and where the employment opportunities will lie. So the way I am going to look at this opportunity is to talk a bit about some of the technical and theoretical concepts. So I know we all know what climate change is, but I think there is a lot of confusion in terms of 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, and things like that. So I thought it would be an opportunity to explain to people what some of these concepts mean. Then I will move on to what suddenly everyone is talking about, ESG and the private sector's reporting, because the private sector is going to play a very important role in the next few years in terms of not just as a business community, but as an active player addressing some of the environmental issues. And finally, I will be discussing some of the insights from the data that we as an organization generate, where we see that there will be opportunities for development opportunities which can increase employment, which will have a lot of skill requirement. And I, of course, leave the inference to the host organization to devise and look at some of this data in terms of how it could help in generating jobs, what are the trends. So I'm also looking forward to the question and answer session. So I am just going to share my slide. Okay, so it's a slightly vast topic. When I was asked to share my topic, I was slightly unsure in terms of what I could speak in terms of the space as far as, greening for skills, the job market as far as green skills are concerned, because we don't directly look at that area. However, because we have been working in this space for a long time, plus I have been engaged in the environmental sector for an equally long time, I felt that there are a lot of trends from our work with industry that can give some perspectives in terms of where we are going as far as skills and green skills are concerned. So I'm calling my presentation Understanding the E of ESG. I think most of you who are listening to this conversation would be knowing that environmental social governance reporting is becoming very, very crucial. There's a lot of regulatory changes in the country and worldwide, which is promoting reporting, which automatically brings the issue of disclosures to the picture, because disclosures is the beginning of ESG reporting. And it is where you start the process of understanding your company's operations and its sustainability parts, so that you can generate enough information which can lead to adequate reporting. I'm also talking about specifically energy transition, because this is supported by the Ministry of Skill Development, and we all understand and know the Prime Minister's commitment towards transitioning to renewable energy. So it is important to look at what the goals are vis-a-vis what is happening on the ground and where the work is required, so that we can transition faster and support the policy directives as announced by the Prime Minister of India. Sorry. So as I said in the beginning, my presentation is divided into 3 parts. The first part is definition of the concepts: climate, emissions, energy. Then I will move on to ESG, reporting frameworks. And finally, I will talk about the data that CDP generates, especially in the context of India, and what are some of the insights that we can look at in terms of identifying opportunities in the space, especially in the context of jobs. So the climate crisis, I think, doesn't need much of an introduction. We are all seeing it. If you switch on the TV the last few days, we can see how North India is being devastated by floods. And although we can't fully say it is just climate change, because there is also a lot of unplanned infrastructure and unplanned development that is involved. But basically, climate change refers to the long-term alteration of temperature and typical weather patterns in a place, which is primarily caused by human activities. And it is very clear now that all the human activities that push for the weather change that is happening involves burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and our industrial processes. So how does this warming happen? It is the concentration of the greenhouse gas emissions that have been greenhouse gases, which have been increasing since the Industrial Revolution. And this has happened primarily due to burning of fossil fuels, land use changes. So what has happened is that our temperature has been constantly increasing. And this is where we need to put a stop to some of the processes that we have been so sure of and have been undertaking. And we need to look at the whole issue of our development process, as well as so many of the activities that we're taking for granted in a different manner. Now, what is actually the global temperature rise that we are discussing? I think most of you are aware of the 2015 Paris Agreement. It is often referred to as the landmark agreement, where all the world governments committed to curb the global temperature to well below 2 degrees above the pre-industrial levels. So we are basically, it was a commitment taken by all the governments who signed the Paris Agreement that they would follow a development trajectory and look at processes that in environmental protection, which would allow the countries to look at a strategy where the global temperature rise would remain well below 2 degrees. However, in 2018, the IPCC realized that that is not enough and actually warned that the global temperature should not exceed 1.5 degrees, otherwise it would have catastrophic effects. And we can see that because we have countries which have never faced extreme heat are now facing extreme heat, and due to that we have incidents of floods in Germany, extreme heat and forest fires in British Columbia. Closer home, we can see that it is becoming more and more common to have extreme temperatures even in our mountainous regions, which were earlier our escape points for a summer vacation. So basically, if we have to limit our global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, what we need to do is achieve a very, very difficult target of reducing the GHG emissions by, they should be half of what they are right now by 2030, which is very, very looks like it's going to be very, very difficult at the moment. There's also another target that has been set globally that the GHG emissions need to drop to net zero by 2050. So the question is, what is required and how do we actually progress in this path? And for this, I think it's very important to understand the role that the private sector is going to play, because it is going to be a very, very crucial role, and the involvement of the private sector is going to be very, very important. I move now to discuss about the CO2 emissions, and this is a graph that I have borrowed from the International Energy Agency. And if we look at this, we see that the global energy-related CO2 emissions grew by 0.9% and reached almost a new high of 36.8 gigatons, which means that if we look at 2022, the emissions are slightly lower than the rise in terms of 2021, and this is because of COVID. There was a rush to get back to normal, and industry, power sector, and all active sectors really increased their business processes and industrial processes. So the CO2 emissions in 2021 were slightly higher in terms of percentage as far as 2022 is concerned. And however, in 2022, there has been also significant changes in terms of transitioning to clean energy, looking at areas like transport. For instance, if we look at transport, the emissions from oil grew more than emissions from coal, but that's basically because air travel increased, and because of the post-pandemic, the traveling increased. So there was obviously a trend to increase, that the transportation, the emissions from transportation increased. However, there was a strong expansion of renewables, and this shows because if we look at the percentage increase between 2020 and 2021 and 2021 and 2022, with regard to the power sector, the percentage emissions has reduced between 2021 and 2022 because of the shift to renewable energy. In terms of, it's interesting if you look at industry, the emissions from industry declined by 1.7% in 2022. And this is basically because we saw a lot of manufacturing curtailment. There was a global decline, and of course, the transition to clean energy processes in the industry has also led to some of the CO2 emissions reducing. So overall, if we look at it, if we compare 2021 and 2022, the percentage increase in CO2 emissions globally has a slight reduction. However, it's not enough. And some of the sectors like transport actually show an increase, which means that there are sectors where the emissions have increased, and while there are others like industry where the emissions have decreased. So what is the role of industry and in this entire process as far as energy transition is concerned? If we look at this visual that is on my presentation, we see that the growth of CO2 emissions, especially in the context of industry, was 19%, and it is projected to rise to 52% in 2050, which is huge, and this is because we see that the operational processes and decarbonization pathways have to transition from a resource heavy and resource intense processes to judicious use of resources, as well as the energy transition has to move faster. There would be also technology changes that will need to be accelerated, which is why the role of industry is going to be very, very crucial in meeting the challenge of climate change. Since we're talking about emissions, I would also like to bring the issue of energy into this discussion. So if we see the facts and figures that have been presented on this slide, we can see that India's fossil fuel consumption in the last decade has increased, and because of that, we have become the third highest emitter of CO2 emissions. I know we have an argument all every time saying that our average household consumes 10th as much as electricity as the average household in the US. We also talk about being at the bottom of the emitters list when we look at per person consumption. However, we also need to be very, very conscious that our energy demand is set to grow, and our growth trajectory as projected is one that would involve the need for energy, and maybe cheap energy, which means that although we are transitioning on a pathway to net zero emissions by 2070, we are also looking at a process that during this transition, how do we generate these energy from low carbon sources, which means that there is an issue of financing clean energy. There is an issue of technology for clean energy, which is going to become more and more a debate and a topic of conversation, and is also going to be an opportunity for looking at in terms of the capacity that we have as a country. And of course, we know that the Prime Minister has announced the ambitious target for 2030 installation of 500 gigawatts of RE energy capacity, which means that we are looking at the reducing emissions by 50%. So these are some of the energy facts that kind of give an overall picture where we are as a country, and where the challenges remain in terms of meeting the energy needs, especially from clean energy. I've been talking about CO2 emissions, so I thought it was important for us to understand the categories of emissions, because I think when we talk about emissions, there is a huge, there's a huge connect with energy. So, and I think more and more we've been seeing this being contextualized in terms of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So basically, scope 1 emissions is the greenhouse gas emissions that a company makes directly, which is from direct operations, which includes, running its vehicles, running its boilers, the use of the electricity within the space. While scope 2 emissions are the indirect emissions, that is where the energy that is being used in the company or in the factory is being sourced from, whether it's being sourced from a clean source or is it being sourced from an unclean source. And thirdly, the more complicated one, where we are now getting into a discussion, is the scope 3 emissions. And this is the category which is basically transitions to the buying of the products, where the products goes, where the product is used. And this is actually the kind of emission that the focus is shifting towards, because industry engagement in climate-related activity is improving, and so the emissions that are creating a major issue is actually the whole scope 3 emissions. I move on to my next slide, which is basically about the Sustainable Development Goals. And this becomes very important because we are now discussing not just climate, but we are also discussing economic growth, and we're discussing industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and more importantly, this is a forum where we are looking at greening and green skills. So I think it's important to discuss the issue of climate change in the context of the SDGs, because on the one hand, while we are looking at climate action, we are also looking at achieving SDGs. And Goal 8 and Goal 9 particularly look at achieving decent work and economic growth, as well as industry, innovation, and infrastructure, while we have Goal 7, Goal 11, and Goal goal 12 and goal 13, which are more towards the environmental aspects, where we are looking at responsible consumption, production, sustainable cities, excuse me, climate action, and clean energy. So I think while we
Excuse
are
me, ma'am,
discussing-
your video is stopped. Please open the video.
just a minute, I don't know how it went off. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, so basically, I think, it's important to look at the SDGs, because I think that presents the development side, the sustainable development angle. While we're talking about climate, we're talking about reducing our emissions. But on the other side, if we look at these goals in an integrated manner, we see that there is very, very strong component, goal 8, which looks at decent work and economic growth. And how does this, in terms of the indicators, match up with the indicators for climate action? So I move on now to the whole chapter on ESG. I'm calling this chapter because I'll bring in the relation of the 3 sections that I'm talking about towards the end of my presentation. Now, if we look at ESG, what is actually ESG? It is a set of quantitative and qualitative indicators used to evaluate a company's performance in key areas related to environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and governance practices. So here you have the 3 pillars. And while this presentation is primarily going to focus on the E part, which is climate, water, energy, waste, biodiversity, and deforestation, it is important to understand that ESG also looks into aspects of social and governance, which means there is a compliance part, the board compliance, the business controls, the procedures are a very important part of environmental social governance reporting, as is the people factor, where we're looking at labor relations, human rights, gender and diversity, data protection, and community relations. I must mention here that when we are talking about ESG, and when we say only E, it doesn't mean that there is no S and G component in the E. Most of these are correlated, because if you are looking at climate change issues or water issues, you are definitely looking at people and the consumption part of it, or what kind of environment you're creating, which is going to be harmful or not harmful for the people. And similarly, I think the governance part is integrated within the environmental too. So these are the 3 pillars of ESG. And one of the areas that we need to really start thinking very, very specifically about is that this will require a very different kind of skill set and understanding of environmental, social, and governance issues. So as and when ESG reporting becomes more and more prominent, this is a space where there is going to be a requirement for people and understanding and capacity building, so that the reporting is done in a manner that is conducive to the purpose for which the reporting is done, that is protecting the environment. Now, what are the benefits of reporting? If we just look at this slide, 12 of the world's largest investors have made bold commitments to net zero emissions. So we need to start understanding that the reporting frameworks have not been generated just for the sake of reporting, but they've been generated because investors today are showing a lot of interest in where a company is going in terms of the sustainability frameworks. If we look at the central banks, network for greening of financial systems has been set up, where our own central bank, the Reserve Bank, is a member. And so greening of the financial systems, how green are the investments that are being made in the companies? All of this is now requiring the generation of data that is made available to the investment community, investor community. So I think it's very important to understand that reporting is going to become more and more important and grow. Similarly, I think the whole issue of building a brand, consumers have started looking at green companies, greening of companies. They're looking at companies which are investing in the betterment of the planet. Between companies, there is more and more transparency and trust building. And of course, there is the whole issue of reputation. So there is a total global framework which is transitioning to an India framework where we have ourselves started mandatory disclosures, mandatory reporting since 2021. 2021 was voluntary, 2022 it's become mandatory. So there is a regulatory framework that is evolving, and this regulatory framework is going to mandate reporting, which is going to make industry look at sustainability issues more and more scientifically and start planning how the transition to net zero or the decarbonization pathways can be done in a manner that creates a win-win situation for the planet as well as for the business. Just a quick stop here to talk about frameworks. It's not very much part of the presentation flow, but I thought it was important that there are several existing reporting frameworks at the moment. I think many of the audience may have heard of GRI, which is the most popular one, which most companies report to. There's also the integrated reporting framework. The TCFD, with which the CDP, which CDP is aligned, is primarily on climate-related disclosures. We are moving towards a standardized disclosure framework, which was recently announced by the ISSB. Nature is becoming very, very important in the reporting frameworks. And of course, now we have our BRSR. So this is just a brief overview, and we probably have a lot of trainings on these global frameworks and what they hope to achieve. But so please feel free to connect with me if you are interested in knowing more about the frameworks. So I move now to the third part of my discussion. And for that, I will be using the data, CDP data. We work with investors and companies, basically helping companies make informed decisions with data, which we generate yearly. So investors ask and use our data to make informed decisions in understanding risks and opportunities that companies have assessed. And in the context of climate, water, and forest, we have 3 questionnaires. We've just recently added a biodiversity and a plastic component, but our 3 questionnaires generate data for investors to take informed decisions in terms of where the impact is. So by the numbers, we have about 742 investors with over US 130 trillion in assets who use our data, 250 plus supply chain members with combined purchasing power of a large amount of money. We also have 20,000 companies responding through CDP, and we have about 1,200 plus cities, states, and regions who also disclose to us. Just to give you an overview of the kind of data that we generate, we know that climate change is a risk. I think we read about it all the time, but what is the total risk is sometimes something that needs to be generated in terms of actual data. So what you're seeing on my screen is some data facts from 2020, generated from the 14,000 odd companies that disclose to us. So if we look at it, $301 billion is the value of risk reported for water impacts. Similarly, $53.1 billion is the financial impact reported from deforestation. 220 plus of the world's largest companies report gains if they transition to to addressing climate-related risks. So I think these are some of the type of insights that every year we try to generate from industry, so that industry can help in assessing their systems, internal systems, and identifying risk factors, as well as defining opportunities in which they need to invest on. Which brings me to opportunities now. I'd like to start with a slide which talks about disclosure trends. I just want to check how much time I have. Okay. So global disclosure trends. And if we look at this graph, you can see that disclosures are becoming more and more common. I like to mention here that disclosures are not for external, not just for external reporting, but I think it is also designed, if it follows a framework like CDP, it is also designed to understand internal strategy. So if we look at the graphs between 2020 and 2021, there was a 35% increase in the disclosures, basically because people witness the impact of climate change, the impact in terms of rising prices of commodities, scarcity of resources. So there was a large increase in between 2020 and 2021, 25% increase in forest disclosures, 14% increase in water disclosures, and 38% increase in climate disclosures. So there has been a trend in terms of the increased disclosures. And if we look at some of the areas where the trends have been, we see that 69% of the companies that disclosed in the third year have emission reduction targets. The companies have set science-based targets. So following the disclosure, we also see that companies have moved on to setting targets, planning decarbonization pathways, and designing their net zero journey. So I move now to about 132 companies disclosed in India in 2022 to CDP India. And if we just look at the reason why I am referring to this, because resilience, risk management are areas where we will see a lot of change, and this is also can be looked at from the perspective of building capacity to address these risks. And this is where probably there will be need for what we are also referring to as green skills. And if we look at climate-related risk, the financial impact reported from climate-related risk was estimated at 2,842 billion Indian rupees by Indian companies responding to CDP India. If we look at a comparative, in 2021, the risks reported were mostly related to reputation and technology, because there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of the technology changes that were required, what would be the transition like. However, the 2022 scenario presents a very different insight on the understanding of risk is, and current regulation was considered the main risk, because companies are beginning to feel aware that there is regulatory reforms happening, and regulation is going to become one of the major issues why companies would need to address the climate-related risks. With regard to the value chain, it's very easy to decipher, because downstream and upstream, it's the acute physical risk that is being reported as the highest risk. And by acute physical risk, obviously, we are looking at immediate impact of extreme weather events like what we're seeing right now, excess rainfall leading to extreme flooding overnight. So this has been regarded as the largest risk factor in terms of the value chain. In terms of the sectoral reporting, the financial services sector reported the highest risk, probably because financial services sector had a lot at stake in terms of where the money needs to go in. Moving on to opportunities, we see that climate opportunity has increased almost 10 times since 2021. And if you look at the figures on the slide, the climate opportunity identified is equivalent to almost 31,000 billion Indian rupees, 10 times more than 2021, as I said earlier. And green hydrogen is being considered one of the largest opportunities. So basically, in terms of the three areas where opportunities are being identified is energy sourcing, products and services, and resource efficiency. So these are three areas where we see that companies have identified opportunities in terms of climate. So these also means that these would be probably areas where there would be considerable growth in the next years. Moving on to emissions, and I touched upon scope 3 emissions earlier. The total emissions reported was 1.4 billion tons CO2 emissions were reported. Scope 3 emissions, I said earlier, is something that companies are beginning to focus on. And as you can see on the right-hand side of my screen, scope 1 emissions have reduced over the years between 2020 and 2022, but scope 3 emissions have increased considerably. If we look at the scope, I think, I'm really sorry, but I think this has been marked in the, so we'll have to look at the years differently because scope 3 emissions is the one that has increased. So the first pillar is actually for 2022. So it's actually showing incorrect, and I apologize for that. But just wanted to mention here that we see increasing trend of scope 3 emissions over the last 3 years, while scope 1 emissions has reduced and scope 2 has remained more or less consistent. So the biggest impact really lies in the supply chain emissions, which are significantly higher. And the CDP assessment of global supply chain work that we are doing shows that the supply chain emissions are almost 11 times higher than the operational emissions, which means that over the next couple of years, there will be larger engagement of companies in the supply chain in terms of reducing the emissions. So from our assessment, we see that the understanding and engagement are areas which companies will be investing in terms of reducing supply chain emissions to a certain amount on transferring innovations and technology also within the supply chain. I also wanted to touch upon the governance aspect because this becomes a very important part, because the understanding of the governance in terms of the climate-related risks and opportunities is going to be very important if a company has to transition to a more sustainable pathway. And we see this in our data. We see that 97% of the companies who are disclosing to us have board level oversight on climate issues. 82% companies report quarterly to the board. So the engagement of the leadership is increasing in terms of understanding where the company is going in terms of looking at the risks of climate change, water, and forest. I move on to now talking about India's energy landscape, which if we look at the present ambition, it is expected to increase from 12% in 2020 to 31 to 41% in 2040, which means that we are looking at the energy market changing tremendously from a fossil fuel dominant, coal dominant energy market to a renewable energy dominated market. Oil trends are going to still remain consistent with a very minor shift, while natural gas is going to slowly, show an increase. But it's very clear from this projections made by the International Energy Agency that there is going to be an increase in the energy trends in terms of renewable energy as far as the Indian energy landscape is concerned. However, if we look at CDP data that we generated in 2021, out of the total 271 terawatt of electricity consumption, only 5% of this is renewable. And this is quite interesting because if we are looking at projections like this, that means the industry really needs to increase the component of energy that is being used in terms of the energy mix. Similarly, in 2022, we see that it's increased slightly, but only up to 9%, which means that there is a large opportunity there for industry to engage more in terms of transitioning to renewable energy. So if we look at the right side of my slide here, the hospitality sector, the food and beverages, agricultural sector, and the transportation services are the fast moving in terms of transitioning to clean and renewable energy. Obviously, transportation with the new EV policy and the EV drive, food and beverage, agriculture is actually a large, almost just a little less than half as far as the renewable energy share is concerned. But we still have a lot of industry like the apparel industry, for instance, and the retail industry where the renewable energy component is still very, very little. The other concern that we have is that while India wants to transition to non-fossil power sources and provide half of the electricity supplied by renewable energy by 2030, we do need a lot of financing that is, estimated at $363 billion worth of investments in new power projects and batteries. So this is where probably disclosure is going to play a major role because it means opening up opportunities for international investors. So there's about 10 minutes. I'll just make some conclusions and then we can open up the forum for question and answer. So if we look at it from a job perspective, I think the shift towards renewable energy needs to be accelerated. In 2022, if only 9% of electricity consumption compared to the 5% in 2021 was from renewable energy, we still need much more opportunities in terms of the industry transitioning to renewable energy and more renewable energy projects. 64 out of the 122 estimated energy-related opportunities are mainly in the direct operations. So we do need to look at going beyond. And I did mention here that we have the whole opportunity of the value chain and how does one look at transitioning to clean energy in the value chain. And that's an area probably that needs some inputs and increase in terms of how we could transition to clean energy. There are several opportunities that the companies have identified in terms of low carbon energy consumption, production related initiatives. And these are likely to increase in the next years. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the sectors that are transitioning to renewable electricity and are being clearly identified, and hopefully this will not be restricted to these few sectors and will go beyond these sectors in terms of creating more opportunities for transition, as well as creating more opportunities for skilling. I will like to stop there and open up the forum for questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now I'm requesting to participants. Any comments or any questions from the participants?
First of all, I would really like to thank you for helping us become more aware about the problems and the scenario and the ways that we can tackle these problems. And we also hope that you will give your consent to speak to us again, perhaps in one more sessions this year. So a lot of thanks from all of us. I'm really grateful for the time that you spent in your careful presentation and such meaningful insights. I also do understand that ESG investing, it surely enables the companies to address climate change through innovations. And this also lowers the GHG emissions, but its benefits definitely go beyond the emission reduction. So the installation or the establishment of renewable energy facilities, for instance, it can lead to creation of, it is leading to creation of a lot of jobs, and sustainable waste management, it cuts pollution, making workplaces and communities safer. So we completely understand the importance of ESG investing, and it is possible for businesses, societies, and environment to be healthy. So these were my few comments, and I'm again thanking you for such an insightful presentation. Now I would request these other listeners to have questions.
Now, Rohit, can you give rights to Parneet Kaur?
Yes, sir. I already gave rights to everyone.
Yeah. Parneet Kaur, please ask your questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, ma'am, for a very wonderful presentation. So my name is Sunil Sahu. I'm the CEO of InnoDust. We are a skilling company. So, ma'am, I have a two technical question. One is like, can you please tell us about scope 3 emissions, because that is not clear to me. And my second question is in the carbon dioxide emission graph, where you presented for 4 years graph record. And my third question would be like, what are the career opportunities to the persons, those who are good in RE, renewable energy, they're working in, what is the career opportunity and how to start it? Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll start with the last one first, because that's relevant to the conversation that we are having. So I must tell you that I made this presentation mostly in terms of a collation, because I wanted to look at what are some of the opportunities myself, and that is why I have kind of put in so much matter. So in terms of what are the opportunities in terms of renewable energy, I mentioned to you that if I look at, and I'm going to use data for this response, if we look at our CDP data that we generate, and if we look at just the 132 companies that disclose to India, we have seen that they start disclosing to us in the first year, and by the third year, all of them have emission reduction projects. And when we say emission reduction projects, this could involve it will obviously involve projects that transition to clean energy. So if we have to go into details of what these projects are, I think that is going to take a lot of time. But I think we need to explore these kind of opportunities, because transitioning to clean energy is actually changes the entire the process, and because of it, even in the sourcing of the energy, in generating that energy and the use of the energy, I think there would be a lot of opportunities. So as a renewable energy professional, I think these will clearly be areas in which there will be jobs as that can be identified. Now, in terms of scope 3 emissions, I think let me just explain to you with a very simple example. When you're making a product, whatever the product is, it is produced in the company, and there is some amount of energy that is used, which creates a process where, you know, it leads to emissions. Now, that is the scope 1. The energy that you are using comes from somewhere. So that somewhere is where the scope 2 energy can be calculated. So if you, I mean, whatever company you're getting the electricity from for producing the product or operating your machine to produce the product is where the scope 2 comes in. Scope 3 is after the production has been done, the processes that are taken, that take place, for instance, you know, transportation to retail, and even to the extent of after consumption of the product, after the product is bought and then it goes out, which is why scope 3 becomes very complicated, because that means the use of the product is also included. So that is where scope 3 is. And I think that's the simplest way of mentioning it. It becomes more complicated in terms of financial services, for instance, scope 3, because it goes to financed emissions. So that is where scope 3 is concerned. I don't know what you wanted to understand in the slide on carbon emissions, but I think, you know, if you want more details, and maybe you could even drop me an email, because there are other people who are, because if it is detailed assessment of the slide, I mean, obviously because of the paucity of time, I haven't taken everything into consideration, but definitely will be able to, you know, please share my email ID, and if anybody wants any clarifications on the slides, I can definitely give it to them.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, can you please share the slide with us? That would be more easy to understand once again.
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Singh, you're on mute, so I can't hear. Can we just have the next question?
Okay, ma'am. Sorry. Now I'm requesting Asu Gupta to ask your question.
Hi, Prarthana, the very nice presentation you had. I think I'm Ashu Gupta. I'm running a consulting firm, which is D2O Learning, and we do a lot of training program related to the sustainable built environment, regarding for the building sector especially. So my question to you that, because this industry, like, of course, I have seen last 15 years, it is growing a much, entire sustainability. And recently the government has announced 3 notifications related to the carbon credit training, or carbon credit trading, and all, as well as the ESG and all. So my because I feel sometimes, of course, my second question will go to the Arpit also regarding the skill development. The first question, how do you think that this carbon credit trading things, there will be a lot of opportunities in that sector? The second is energy transition. When we talk about, a lot of people think only the renewable energy, but I feel sometimes the energy efficiency is the key for first step in that. So how do you think the energy efficiency market also, like these companies who are disclosing, their first step to convert their 100% on renewable energy side, or are they focusing on the energy efficiency side also, and energy conservation side? So that is something I want to ask, because you are a lot of disclosures are already done by the multinational companies in India or the Indian companies. What do you think about, Prarthana, about it?
So Ashu, I think I always make my presentations in such a way that I put forward a lot of slides which kind of raises questions. So I don't really have many answers, and I look at this as more a discussion process. So which is why sometimes I just put up a lot of things which I question myself too. So to your question on the kind of projects, I think we've had see, one of the things we don't do is really analyze every company's data, which is, I think, a negative point from as an organization. But we do have the data. But whatever we have and whatever we analyze, I think it's important to understand that as you said, it's not just about renewable energy. It's also about energy efficiency. It's also about resourcing energy. It's also about the value chain where you reduce the energy use. So I think, we simplify terminologies very much. When we say renewable energy, we just think that everything transitioning to solar energy is renewable energy, which is not the case, because efficiency of operations is also very important. Now, what our disclosure process does, and I think this would be an answer, I think one of my technical team would be able to give better response, because we have 65 plus questions in our climate disclosure questionnaire. And it's divided into 5 sections. So we have one section which talks about totally the governance mechanism of the company. Then there's one section which looks at energy. There's another one on emissions. Now, the energy part actually talks about how the energy is being sourced. What is the technical processes that are being engaged to ensure energy efficiency, and what are the energy transitions? So there are 3 areas that we look at. So as you said, I think if we delve deeper, there would definitely be opportunities in this, because when you're talking about shifting to more energy efficient processes, you're also talking about technology transfer, for instance, right? So there would be an opportunity there, which is not related to energy maybe, but somebody from a technology side could become, is the opportunity there. So I think, I would suggest that Arpit, it would be very interesting to actually assess some of this. And because the reason why I accepted this is because I think disclosures for the sake of disclosures of no use if you're sitting on a bunch of data. But if you're talking to, multiple partners like this, you have questions like what Ashu asked us, and we can actually identify, what are we have. If you look at it, we are looking at 20,000 companies world over, some of the biggest. I'm sure there is data which talks about where the opportunities are going to be there. Similarly, in India, if I look at, I know that there are processes within the industry which is looking at conservation, but obviously because our job is to look at just the disclosures and to get companies to look at risk assessment and opportunities, we don't really get into the skill part of it, right? So I think it's also about identifying opportunities together. So if I have to be very honest with you, I can't really give you case examples, but I'm not saying that we do not have the case examples. I think if we analyze it, I'm sure we would be able to find some case examples because we have the data.
Thank you, Prarthana. I think I'll coordinate with you, and you can connect with the technical team also.
Sure.
Because we have several clients come forward to want to disclose, but they're not pretty aware about it. So I'll speak with you.
Thank you.
I've also shared my contact details, Ashuji, with you, my mobile number and my email ID. We can always have a detailed discussion at least, maybe physically.
Sure, Arpit. Thank you so much.
Looking forward.
I enjoy these conversations very much because it sets up a thought process for me also. So it's not just about giving a lecture and leaving, which is why, I put in a lot of thought into my presentations because it generates this conversation. So
absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's one more question, then we can close because I think I think it's 1 o'clock or something. Yes, Mr. Shiv.
So, Singh, sir, you're in mute again, sir.
I think Mr. Shiv wants to ask.
Yes.
Mr. Shiv, please ask your question.
Yes, Prarthana. So my question is, I'm the founder of 3R0 Waste, which is a startup based out of Manesar. So my question is, if I see the overall gamut of carbon, emissions footprint calculations, waste would be, I would say, somewhere between 2% or some 5% based on the company's perspective. So my first question is, how do you see is that number a relative number, and if you can share some specification on the waste disclosures of companies. And the second question is in terms of ESG. Presently in India, I think 1,000 companies are supposed to how do you
Disclose.
see that changes in the next 3 to 5 years?
To your first question on waste, we have some questions which do talk about waste, but actually because our questionnaire is directed more from the, from to a climate kind of an angle, it is more in the context of the emissions. And so if you have to ask me if there are any questions on waste, yes, but we have a city disclosure program where we have a larger component as far as the waste is concerned, and how waste, the issue of waste is tackled by cities. So there we have a much larger component as far as the questions on waste are concerned. And but in terms of the companies and in terms of the percentage, I don't think there is a, I don't think I'd like to say that we give importance to one versus the other. I think it's basically when you're talking about climate, the discussion is skewed towards emissions, and it has become more towards CO2 emissions over the years, which is why the climate questionnaire is inclined or developed like that. But waste is very much part of the discussion as far as industry is concerned. I think if we also have a disclosure on water, for instance, and we also have on forests, but we're transitioning to biodiversity, and now we have a plastic component which is being included. So I think the way you look at waste and how the emphasis on waste is going to come in these questions, which have now started being included, because we discussed about the fact that while we talk about climate, water, forest, we don't really talk about, say, the packaging processes or things like that. So that is the reason why plastic has been incorporated. But CDP has primarily been a carbon disclosure project, right? So we are ourselves also growing based on the needs that are arising, countrywide and globally. So there will be some information we can help look at it and then come back to you on what is the kind of information we generate. But the focus on waste is more in our city's disclosure program, because we're looking at the city as an entity which generates, and also because the city has a waste management program. And we are also now looking at the industry waste issue through our plastic disclosure questions. So happy to share some of that with you, and then you could give us some inputs on that. So that is the first question. I'm sorry, you asked me something else.
The ESG, how it is going to go in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yes. So I think ESG is going to grow. I think the more complicated question is that how is the reporting framework going to evolve? Because so far, as I said, I just stopped for a few minutes on one particular slide, and I said that we have GRI, which is probably the oldest and the most known, which looks at environmental, social, governance, all aspects. And then we also have the integrated reporting framework, which looks at multiple frameworks. Then, of course, we have the TCFD, which is very focused on climate. But now we also have a climate transitioning to nature. We have something called the TNFD, which is looking at a nature-related framework. Just recently, it's not even been a month, the International Sustainability Standards Board announced that they would like to have an overall framework that kind of everyone aligns to. But that becomes a bit complicated with India having their own framework of BRSR. So I think the ESG space has evolved a lot over the last couple of years. And I think the next 1 or 2 years are going to be very defining in terms of where we go. But what I can be sure of is that ESG reporting is here to stay, in the sense that it is not just about reporting, it's about internal assessment of a company in terms of where it stands, climate, in terms of climate risks, how a company is identifying opportunities. So I think it is going to become more and more accepted, and we will move beyond the larger companies, because if we look at it, our supply chain program actually looks at companies disclosing in the supply chain. So what I can say with very strong a conviction is that ESG reporting is going to increase. The regulatory aspect is something that probably we need to wait and watch, because at some point of time there has to be alignment, but because countries are in different stages in terms of their development paradigm, we might have to see how local frameworks align with global frameworks, so that there are not too many reporting frameworks which can be very cumbersome, because at the moment there are companies which report to GRI, they report to the integrated framework, they report to CDP, and they also report to BRSR. But I'm sure that, at some point of time, not everyone will want to report to every framework, right? So I think the priority will be the company's decision.
So my thought was, from top 1,000 companies, will it go to all public sector companies, or they will say, let us say, like the revenue is more than 100 crores? What would be that parameter where the government is thinking? Any idea on that?
I really don't know, because I think ideally, I think everybody should disclose, because I think, I think if you, that is the reason why I talked about the value chain so much. But Mr. Shiv, the issue is also the capacity, you see, because now for a larger company, let me give you a small example. Our own sample was 200 until last year. And today, this year we increased it to 1,000, but we are having a lot of difficulty to go beyond the 200, because understanding disclosures, the capacity to disclose, all these would need a lot of a support framework. So while we are increasing the number, we also need to think about a support framework for a country like countries like ours, where you have companies who may not have a dedicated ESG professional or a sustainability lead. And this is where I think the skill discussion comes in terms of how do you build the capacity and the skill.
Thank you much.
I think we are time-wise come beyond. So maybe you could just collate the questions and send it to me.
One more question from Deepak Rai.
Deepak.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll be very quick. Thank you for an excellent presentation and a very nice talk. In fact, the first question, a lot of answers was just covered in your previous point, but still, let me reformulate it, ma'am. From voluntary sustainability reporting to now mandated BRSR-led reporting, say for India INC, how has been the journey, and are we going on the right track? And just to add to it, would you see this as a potential trade barrier as well in the coming future, especially when the frameworks are not completely aligned? There are different reporting frameworks, So do you reckon this may lead to a potential trade barrier for investments in the country, or selling or rather exporting to EU markets or other markets as well? That's the first question.
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question, but it's also a difficult question to respond at a time when we are, in very uncertain stages. The way, if I speak as an employee of a global organization dealing with disclosure, I think the way globally the world is looking at is that the International Sustainability Standards Board is going to become an overall framework and look at standardizing, but I don't think it's going to happen immediately, because they will also have to look at how it aligns. Let me give you a simple example. 2030 was the global target in terms of achieving net zero, but because countries have spoken in their own voice, we have 2040, we have 2050, we have 2060, and we have India making a target of 2070. So I think these are international negotiations, depending on where a country is as far as the development trajectory is concerned, or where we are as far as environment is concerned. But what I want to emphasize on is that disclosures and reporting today are not because someone else is asking you to do it. It's because it is helping companies to look at their internal processes. It's because customers are asking you to become a sustainable company. So I think we should emphasize on that part of it. How do we get more and more companies and more communities to be engaged in this, so that it is not just about regulation. Regulation is one side. It is to basically push the process. But ultimately, as long as a company realizes that it is its own business, it's good business, to disclose. I want to give you a very simple example. No company would want to have a factory in an area where we know that there is going to be a sea level rise and it's going to wash away. So if that, these are the kind of questions that are actually driving the disclosure process. Sourcing, you see the weather change happening. If somebody is dependent on a particular type of agriculture and the raw material is based on that particular type of agriculture, and we know that weather change is going to impact that agricultural process, so you're already under a threat. So estimation, any framework that helps to estimate this kind of processes helps to internalize and look at. So I think in the next few years, that is going to be the main agenda. It's not about which reporting framework, which is why I've asked a lot of friends who lead the sustainability process in a company, and I've told them that, BRSR has just come in. Are you going to disclose to us? And they tell me very clearly that CDP disclosure helps us look at certain areas very deeply, which is why we are going to continue to disclose to us. But the BRSR is also going to help us look at certain things. So that is why we're going to disclose. So I think right now, companies are realizing the impact of what is happening in the environment, and they would like to look through their internal processes so that they can safeguard their business process. And similarly, they can also safeguard their reputation, because I think customers, consumers, the youth are becoming very conscious. I think so ultimately, sustainability is not about what other people think about you. It's also about how you're going to sustain yourself. So in terms of your question on reporting framework, frankly speaking, I really don't know where it's going to go. From whatever my conversations have been with people who are working in the reporting frameworks, BRSR is mandated now, so companies are getting into it. But as I said, I'm not sure what the quality of data is going to be in the next couple of years, at least, because there's a lot of requirement in terms of the data generation, the skills to be developed there, the kind of information generation that needs to be done. So I think that is an area that we need to really look at and discuss.
Thank you so much, Prarthana ji. I think this is one of those webinars where we would sit for hours and hours and keep on listening to you and through our questions, because it is such a one that you have been such a fantastic and fabulous speaker, very informative, and secondly that this is being a new area for all of us as a country. The tendency to explore it and to get deeper is definitely there. So from my side, I'd like to, please, you're saying something.
No, I just said we should have an offline conversation so that it's not all recorded, because a lot of things I say are also based on opinion. So I must put that as a disclaimer, because, it's also very opinion, because it's not like I'm an expert in every area.
Absolutely. Prarthana ji, we'll get in touch with you as the Skill Council for Green Jobs would like to collaborate in developing these kind of trainings and research. We would like to get into a research. So we would get back to you maybe in a day or two. And I'm really thanking you once again for coming to us and being such a fantastic speaker. A lot of insights shared. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arpit sir, for appreciating this presentation. First, I would like to thanks to ma'am for accepting our invitation for this presentation. Thank you, ma'am, for excellent presentation. It's a very informative and knowledgeable Hope all the participants are get benefited. Once again, thank you very much to you. And I'm requesting you to share your slides. So many participants are asking on the chat box. And finally, I would like to thanks all the participants for their valuable presence and support. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. PV Singh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.